You're standing in a hospital emergency room, the monitor flatlines. Doctors move fast, every second counts, and the very first thing they reach for isn't a miracle drug. It isn't a cutting-edge injection developed by billion-dollar pharmaceutical research. It's salt water, a bag of saline solution, sodium chloride dissolved in water, the same mineral your doctor has been warning you to avoid for the last 50 years, the same white death printed on warning labels across the Western world since the 1970s. Does that strike you as strange? Because it should. Here's what we've been told our entire lives. Salt is dangerous. Salt raises blood pressure. Salt strains your heart. Reduce your intake. Watch your sodium. The official recommendation from the World Health Organization caps daily consumption at 5 grams. 5. That's barely a teaspoon. And yet, the moment your body shuts down, the moment modern medicine needs to bring you back from the edge, the first thing poured directly into your bloodstream is sodium chloride solution. Ask yourself one question: how does a substance that supposedly destroys your cardiovascular system become the emergency rescue tool for that exact same system? Either salt is the silent killer we've been warned about for half a century, or the warning itself is the problem. There is no comfortable middle ground here. The human body isn't a bag of chemistry. It's an electrical machine. Your nerve cells fire through electrochemical signals. Your heart beats because charged particles move across membranes in precise rhythmic sequence. No electrolyte balance, no signal, no heartbeat, nothing. Salt isn't flavor. Salt is the battery. Distilled water injected into your veins with no sodium, no electrolytes, doesn't save you. It ends you. The electrical circuit opens. This isn't opinion, this is physics. So we've known this on some level for as long as medicine has existed. And yet, an entire global health apparatus spent 50 years telling us to eat less of the one mineral that keeps our electrical system running. We'll return to who designed that campaign, and when, and why. Because when we get there, the answer will not comfort you. For now, start here. Start with the image you've seen 100 times in hospitals, in television dramas, in real life. That clear plastic bag, that slow drip, that unremarkable solution of salt and water keeping a human being alive. You already knew this. You just never asked why. Let's go. Shift your gaze from the hospital room to a dictionary. Just a dictionary. Because buried inside the most ordinary words in the English language is a confession that historians have been walking past for centuries without stopping to read it. The word salary, your salary, the money deposited into your account every month, it comes from the Latin salarium, the payment given to Roman soldiers, and salarium comes from sal, salt. Roman soldiers were paid in salt. We're told this was simply a convenient portable commodity, a practical choice for the ancient world. Nothing more. Do you seriously believe that the most powerful military empire in human history, an empire that conquered 3 continents, built aqueducts, codified law, paid its legions in seasoning? Let's apply one simple test. The most interesting part is just beginning. Write in the comments what city you're from, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. The tension is rising. Who's watching us from where? Drop a like and subscribe to the channel. There's more to come. Mark yourselves in the comments. Which country are you from? Hit that like button and subscribe. The plot thickens. Let's check our geography. Right where you are right now, smash that thumbs up and subscribe. We're just warming up. Tell us, where are you watching from? Support the video with a like and hit that subscribe button. The climax is near. Share what corner of the world you're in right now. Drop a like and make sure to subscribe. Things are developing rapidly. Write your city in the chat. Slam that like and hit subscribe so you don't get lost. All the juiciest stuff is ahead. Let's get acquainted. Who's from where? Hit like and subscribe right now. The intrigue is building. Right where you're watching this episode from and reward us with a like and subscription. Emotions are off the charts. Quickly write what city you're from, drop a fat like and subscribe to the channel. Follow the linguistic trail. Salary, salt payment, soldier, from sal dare to give salt. Salute, From salus, the Latin word meaning health, salvation, and wholeness simultaneously, and salus is the root of the word salvation itself. Stop. Read that list again. Health, salvation, soldier, salary, salute. Every pillar of Roman civilization, military service, compensation, physical well-being, spiritual rescue, encoded with the same root, the same mineral. This isn't coincidence. Languages don't accidentally embed the same substance into their words for money, health, and salvation at the same time. That's not linguistics. That's a map. It's like finding the word electricity at the root of words meaning food, payment, and God in an ancient language. You wouldn't call that a quirk of grammar. You'd call it evidence that the people who built that language understood something fundamental about electricity, something we've since forgotten. Our ancestors weren't calling salt a condiment. They were encoding its function directly into the structure of human communication. They knew what it did. They knew what happened without it. Either salt was so critical to Roman civilization that it became the conceptual foundation of words for money, health, and survival, or the most sophisticated civilization of the ancient world built its entire vocabulary around a garnish. There is no third option, and the answer is obvious. Remember this linguistic fossil record. We'll return to it when the full architecture of control becomes visible. And at that point, these words will mean something far more specific than etymology. But the etymology is just the surface layer. Beneath it lies something that makes a vocabulary look trivial. Because some people didn't just talk about salt, they started wars over it, wars over seasoning. Let's look at that claim directly, because the official version asks us to accept something extraordinary while pretending it's mundane. Moscow, June 1648. A crowd surrounds the Kremlin. They aren't demanding land reform or political representation. They're demanding salt. The riot lasts 3 days. Parts of the city burn. Tsar Alexis is forced to surrender his closest advisors to the mob. Multiple people are executed to restore order, all of it, over a condiment. We're told the gabel, France's royal salt tax, was simply an economic grievance, an unpopular levy, like a parking fine that got out of hand. Do you really think the French peasantry stormed barricades and dismembered tax collectors over the price of something they sprinkled on soup? Try to remember right now. Name one riot in recorded history started over pepper, over cinnamon, over any other seasoning. Take your time. Nothing. Zero. The historical record is absolutely silent. We see wars over salt in Rome. We see wars over salt in medieval France. We see wars over salt in Venice, where the entire maritime empire, the fleets, the trade routes, the political architecture was built on salt monopoly, not spice routes. We see Gandhi walking 240 miles to the sea in 1930 specifically to harvest salt in defiance of British law, triggering a movement that cracked an empire. Do you feel the dissonance yet? This is not the behavior of people fighting over flavor. This is the behavior of people fighting for survival. Now apply the engineer's test. A population fighting with this ferocity at this scale across this many centuries and civilizations. What does that level of desperation actually tell us about what was being restricted? It's like watching people riot over oxygen tank prices and concluding the real issue was cost of living. The violence doesn't make sense unless the substance is non-negotiable for basic human function. Either salt was a biological necessity so fundamental that restricting it constituted a weapon of mass control, or the most geographically and historically diverse collection of human populations on Earth all independently decided to burn cities over table condiments. There is no third option. This is not a series of economic coincidences. This is evidence of a pattern, one spanning continents, centuries, and civilizations that the official version of history has been quietly filing under __quote_2__, and hoping we never line up side by side. We're lining them up now, and when we get to the physiology, to what sodium restriction actually does to a human brain, the riots will make complete and terrifying sense. Let's return to the mines, because while historians debate the politics of salt riots, the ground itself has been keeping a different kind of record, one that doesn't care about official narratives, take the Wieliczka salt mine in Poland. It has been continuously documented since 1044 AD. By the 13th century, it was already one of the largest industrial operations in the medieval world. At its peak, Wieliczka produced approximately 30,000 tons of salt per year. That number is in the official records. Verified, checkable. Now let's turn on the calculator and just count. Medieval Poland's population in the 13th century, roughly 2 million people. Wieliczka alone, one mine, producing 30,000 tons annually. That's 15 kilograms of salt per person per year from a single operation, and Wieliczka wasn't alone. Across medieval Europe, there were dozens of comparable extraction sites. Hallstatt in Austria, Lüneburg in Germany, the Crimean coastal operations, the Saharan caravan routes carrying salt slabs the size of paving stones across 1,500 kilometers of desert. The total output doesn't reconcile with the official explanation. We're told all this salt went to food preservation, salting meat, curing fish, storing vegetables through winter. Sounds reasonable until you run the numbers. To preserve enough meat for one person through one winter requires approximately 3 to 4 kilograms of salt. Multiply by 2 million people. That's 8,000 tons maximum, so for the entire country for the entire year. Wieliczka alone produced nearly 4 times that figure. Where did the rest go? Not stored, salt doesn't spoil, but the documented distribution records show it moving constantly through trade networks of extraordinary complexity and reach. Not wasted, every gram was taxed, tracked, and fought over. Something consumed it, something large, something the official food preservation story cannot account for. It's like a city of 2 million people somehow burning through the electrical output of a nuclear power plant when the only documented appliances are candles and fireplaces. The consumption exists, the explanation doesn't. Either the actual population of medieval Europe was vastly larger than historians claim, large enough to consume this volume through normal use, or salt was serving a function that has been quietly removed from the historical record. There is no third option. Remember these tonnage figures. We'll come back to them when we reach the geological evidence, and at that point, a third explanation will emerge that makes both previous options look conservative. But first, we need to talk about what salt restriction actually does to a human being, because that changes everything. Now look at what salt restriction actually does to a living human being. Not theory, not speculation, documented, measurable, reproducible effects that the official health narrative somehow forgot to mention while it was busy designing warning labels. The human brain runs on electrical signals. Those signals require sodium to cross cell membranes. Reduce sodium intake significantly, drop it toward the levels recommended by modern health guidelines, and measurable cognitive changes follow within days. Slower processing, reduced working memory, decreased capacity for complex reasoning. I know what you're thinking right now. This sounds convenient. Too convenient. A mineral that makes you smarter when you have enough of it and docile when you don't? Fine, let's go to the documented evidence. A 2011 study published in the Journal of Nutrition tested cognitive performance in adults under controlled sodium restriction. The results showed measurable decline in attention and processing speed within 2 weeks. 2 weeks, not years of deficiency, 14 days of eating the way your doctor recommends. Now scale that. Not one person, an entire population, kept at subsistence level sodium for generations. A population that cannot concentrate, cannot organize. A population that processes information slowly, cannot identify patterns of control. A population with suppressed cognitive function cannot build the kind of lateral thinking required to question authority, coordinate resistance, or imagine alternatives to its current condition. This is not a side effect. This is a feature. Look at the gabelle, France's salt tax, through this lens now. The French crown didn't just tax salt for revenue. The gabelle set a mandatory minimum purchase. Every person above the age of 8 was legally required to buy a fixed amount of salt per week from royal depots, at a price the crown controlled. Always just enough, never freely available. Who in their right mind designs a tax that mandates minimum consumption of a specific mineral if that mineral is just a flavoring agent? It's like a government legislating that every citizen must purchase a precise weekly dose of a specific pharmaceutical compound from state-controlled pharmacies at state-controlled prices. We would call that pharmaceutical governance. We would ask hard questions. We call the gabelle a tax dispute, and we move on. Either the French crown possessed detailed knowledge of human biochemistry 5 centuries before modern nutrition science, or this was the most inexplicably precise piece of economic legislation in European history. The answer is obvious, and it is not comfortable. But the scariest part isn't the gabelle. The scariest part is what happened in the 20th century when the same architecture of control was rebuilt, whereas without the tax collectors, without the riots, without anyone noticing at all. The architecture rebuilt without anyone noticing. Let's look at exactly how that happened. Because the timeline is specific, the actors are named, and the sequence is not accidental. 1977. The United States Senate Select Committee on Nutrition publishes the first official dietary goals for the United States. For the first time in American history, a government body instructs the population to dramatically reduce sodium intake. The recommended ceiling, 3,000 milligrams per day. That's roughly 1.5 teaspoons of salt. The science behind this recommendation, a single researcher, Louis Dahl, working in the 1950s and 60s. His method, feed laboratory rats the human equivalent of 500 grams of sodium per day, roughly 50 times the average human consumption, and observe that they develop cardiovascular problems. Do you seriously believe this is a sufficient basis for restructuring the diet of an entire civilization? 50 times normal intake, applied to rats, extrapolated to humans, presented as settled science. It's like concluding that water is dangerous because drowning exists, then recommending everyone limit their fluid intake to half a glass per day. But the recommendation spread. WHO adopted it. National health bodies across Europe followed. By the 1990s, the anti-salt consensus was global, institutional, and effectively unchallengeable. A single flawed rat study became the nutritional law of the planet. Now look at what happened in parallel. The Volga boatmen of 19th century Russia consumed between 20 and 30 grams of sodium per day, 5 to 6 times the modern recommended maximum. These were men performing extreme physical labor in brutal conditions. No documented epidemic of cardiovascular collapse. No records of the mass health crisis that modern guidelines would predict. They worked, they functioned. They were, by contemporary accounts, extraordinarily physically resilient. Campaign soldiers in Napoleon's army carried salt rations consuming comparable quantities. Roman legionaries, whose salarium we've already examined, operated at peak physical and cognitive performance on salt levels that modern dietitians would classify as immediately hazardous. How is it possible that the humans of the 19th century could consume 6 times our recommended maximum without consequence, but we cannot? Either human biochemistry fundamentally changed sometime in the 20th century, which no credible evidence supports, or the guidelines were never based on human health. We're left with one conclusion. The anti-salt campaign that emerged from a single rat study spread through institutional channels and became global doctrine within 20 years was not a public health initiative. It was the gabelle, rebuilt without the tax collectors, without the riots. And it gets worse, because in 1996, researchers found something in the data that should have stopped the entire campaign cold. The finding that should have stopped everything. Let's look at it directly, because it has been sitting in the published record since 1996, and the official guidelines have not moved 1 millimeter in response. Researcher John Alderman at the University of California, San Francisco conducted a meta-analysis of existing sodium restriction studies. His finding: low sodium diets were associated with a significant increase in insulin resistance, the same metabolic condition that precedes type 2 diabetes, the same condition now affecting approximately 422 million people worldwide, a number that has tripled since the anti-salt campaign reached full institutional force in the 1980s. Read that again. The dietary intervention designed to protect our health may have directly contributed to the largest metabolic health crisis in recorded human history. Do you feel the ground shifting? Now look at the animals. Because they haven't been given dietary guidelines, nobody handed a white-tailed deer a WHO pamphlet. And what do deer do without any institutional guidance across every continent where they exist? They travel enormous distances. Documented cases of white-tailed deer covering over 150 kilometers on foot through predator territory across highways to reach a single salt lick. Not food, not water, salt specifically. Elephants in Kenya excavate cave systems up to 160 meters deep into Mount Elgon, generations of elephants over centuries, purely to access mineral-rich salt deposits. No nutritionist recommended this, no government mandated it. Pure instinct operating across millions of years of evolutionary refinement says, find salt, consume salt, travel any distance necessary to obtain salt. Who in their right mind looks at this cross-species biological imperative and concludes that the correct human dose is 1.5 teaspoons per day? Here is the chain we've now assembled. A single researcher's rat study using 50 times normal intake generates a guideline. The guideline goes global within 20 years. Simultaneously, insulin resistance rates begin climbing. The diabetes epidemic accelerates, obesity follows the same curve, and the guidelines don't change. It's like a bridge engineer recommending you remove 2 of your car's 4 wheels for safety reasons, watching accident rates triple, and responding by publishing a new pamphlet confirming the original recommendation. Either the institutions maintaining these guidelines are catastrophically incompetent, failing to read their own published research for nearly 30 years, or the research is being read, understood, and the guidelines are being maintained deliberately. There is no comfortable third option. We've traced the control architecture from ancient monopolies to modern dietary law. But we haven't yet asked the deepest question. What were we before the restriction began? What did humans look like when salt was freely available? The geological record has an answer, and it will change how you see everything. Zoom out now, far out, past the dietary guidelines, past the medieval mines, past the Roman legions. Let's look at the ground itself, because the Earth has been recording a story that no institutional guideline can revise. Take the Permian salt deposits of Kansas and Oklahoma, vast underground formations, some stretching 300 meters thick, sitting in the middle of a continent hundreds of kilometers from any ocean. The official explanation: ancient seabeds evaporated over millions of years, leaving salt behind. Sounds reasonable, until you ask one question: where are the fossils? A genuine ancient seabed contains marine fossils. Shells, coral structures, skeletal remains of ocean life, layered throughout the sediment exactly as you'd expect from millions of years of biological activity. The Permian deposits contain almost none. Vast salt formations, geographically enormous, chemically pure, and biologically silent. No shells, no coral, no marine record, nothing. It's like finding a lake-sized swimming pool filled with water but with no drain. No pipes, no water source, and no footprints anywhere near it. The water is real. The infrastructure that should explain it doesn't exist. Now look at the topsoil anomalies. Across Eurasia and North America, soil surveys consistently find salt concentrations in inland regions that current climate models cannot explain. These aren't coastal areas. These aren't regions with underground brine seepage. These are continental interiors with salt levels that by every established geological model should not be there. We're told, ancient geology, slow processes. Nothing unusual. Do you seriously believe slow geological processes deposited chemically pure salt across continental interiors without leaving a single marine fossil to document the process? Here is the chain. No marine fossils in massive salt formations. Anomalous salt in continental topsoils thousands of kilometers from any sea. Salt deposits of impossible purity and impossible geographic distribution. Each fact explained separately by official geology, never examined together. When you line them up, They point at a single event, and not millions of years of gradual evaporation, but a rapid, catastrophic, salt-laden hydrological event of planetary scale. A flood, not metaphorical, geochemical, something that moved salt-saturated water across entire continents fast enough to deposit mineral layers without biological accumulation, fast enough to reset everything. Either geological processes we've never observed and cannot model somehow produce these formations, or something happened to this planet that our official history begins after, not before. There is no third option. We'll return to these deposits when the full picture assembles, because the tonnage figures from Wieliczka that we calculated earlier, the numbers that didn't reconcile, are about to make sudden, devastating sense. But first, what did the world look like before this event? The Amber Record knows. The Amber Record. Let's go there now, because this is where the pre-catastrophe world stops being hypothesis and starts being physical evidence you can hold in your hand. Amber is fossilized tree resin. Sometimes it traps air bubbles as it hardens, microscopic pockets of whatever atmosphere existed at the moment of fossilization. In the 1980s, researchers at Scripps Institution of Oceanography analyzed these ancient air bubbles using mass spectrometry. Their finding, oxygen concentrations in pre-Cretaceous amber consistently measured approximately 30 to 35%. Today's atmospheric oxygen level is 21%. Stop. That's not a minor variation. That's a fundamentally different atmosphere. A world with 35% atmospheric oxygen means every biological process runs faster, more efficiently, more powerfully. Wound recovery accelerates. Cognitive function operates at higher baseline capacity. Physical endurance extends dramatically, and critically, the electrical conductivity of biological tissue increases. The body's ability to transmit electrochemical signals improves at every level. Now reintroduce salt into this equation. In our current 21% oxygen atmosphere, sodium is essential for nerve signal transmission. It's the baseline that keeps the electrical system minimally functional, but in a 35% oxygen environment, with higher atmospheric pressure, richer biological fuel, greater cellular efficiency, sodium wouldn't just maintain function, it would amplify it. Salt in that world wasn't a battery, it was a superconductor. Do you feel what this means? The gigantic flora of the pre-catastrophe record, ferns the size of buildings, dragonflies with 70-centimeter wingspans documented in the fossil record without dispute, didn't exist because of random mutation. They existed because the operating conditions of the planet were categorically different. More oxygen, more pressure, more conductive biology. And humans, if humans existed in that world, which the folkloric record across every civilization insists they did, would have been operating at neurological and physical capacities we cannot currently access. Here's where loop number 1 closes. Remember the Roman salarium, the salary, the soldier, the salus, salvation? Our ancestors didn't encode salt into their words for health and survival because it was a convenient seasoning. They encoded it because they remembered dimly through the distortion of generations that salt was once the biological key to a level of human function we no longer reach. The linguistic fossil record and the geological fossil record are saying the same thing, in two completely different languages. Either this convergence, amber oxygen data, gigantic fossil biology, universal salt mythology, and Roman etymology, is the most elaborate coincidence in scientific history, or it is evidence of a prior world operating at specifications far beyond our current condition. The answer is obvious, and the Wieliczka numbers are about to confirm it. Let's return to Wieliczka, to those tonnage figures that didn't reconcile, because now we have the missing variable, and the calculation finally resolves into something that should make you cold. We established one mine, 30,000 tons annually, serving a documented population of 2 million people. The food preservation math consumed 8,000 tons maximum. That left 22,000 tons per year unaccounted for, per year, from one mine. Now introduce the pre-catastrophe hypothesis. If the amber oxygen data is accurate, and it is physically measurable, not theoretical, then a human body operating in a 35% oxygen environment with full superconducting sodium function would require dramatically more sodium than our current depleted biology demands. Conservative estimate, 3 to 4 times our current baseline consumption, not 5 grams per day, 15 to 20 grams minimum, simply to maintain the higher-order neurological function that richer atmospheric conditions enabled. Run that number against the population, a civilization of humans operating at pre-catastrophe biological specifications, consuming 20 grams of sodium daily. That's 7.3 kilograms per person per year. Multiply by 2 million people, 14.6 million kilograms. Nearly 15,000 additional tons per year just from Poland's documented population. Add 8,000 tons for food preservation. You need 23,000 tons. Wieliczka produced 30,000. The numbers reconcile for the first time perfectly, not for a primitive medieval population eating salted fish, for a post-catastrophe population still carrying the biological memory of higher function, still requiring sodium at rates that mystified later historians who assumed the consumption was waste or corruption in the records. Do you feel what just happened? The __3 mining tonnage that no food preservation model could explain, explained completely by a single variable that official history erased from the equation, the prior human biological baseline. It's like finding a city's electrical grid sized for 10 times its current population and concluding the engineers miscalculated. They didn't miscalculate. The city used to be larger, or the people used to consume more power, or both. Either the medieval mining records are systematically falsified across dozens of independent sites spanning 5 centuries, which would require a conspiracy of archivists so vast it defies logic, or the consumption was real, and we've been using the wrong biological model to interpret it. There is no third option. We now have 4 independent lines of evidence converging on the same conclusion: geological deposits without marine fossils, amber oxygen readings, tonnage figures that only reconcile with higher biological baselines, and a global suppression architecture targeting the one mineral that bridges current and prior human function. This is not a coincidence. This is a system, and someone built it, someone who understood exactly what they were restricting. And why? Someone built it. Let's look at what that means. Precisely. Without flinching. Because this is where every thread we've pulled converges into a single picture. Look at the full architecture assembled across history. The Gabel mandating minimum salt doses at state-controlled prices, Venice burning competitor fleets rather than allowing free salt trade, the Moscow riots suppressed with executions rather than supply relief. Lewis Dahl's rat study elevated to global dietary law within 20 years. The 1996 insulin resistance findings absorbed and ignored. The WHO guidelines unchanged for nearly 5 decades despite contradicting evidence accumulating in their own published literature. We see control, we see control, we see control at every level, in every century, on every continent. Ask yourself, what other substance in human history has been simultaneously essential for survival, subject to state monopoly, restricted through law, taxed into scarcity, and then, when monopoly became unfashionable, replaced with an institutional health campaign achieving identical restriction through different means? Nothing. The answer is nothing. This is not a series of unrelated policy decisions. This is a single continuous project across different management structures. Now apply the final calculation. If current human sodium consumption averages 3,400 milligrams per day globally, and the pre-catastrophe biological baseline required 15,000 to 20,000 milligrams, then modern humanity is operating at roughly 20% of its prior neurological fuel supply, not 80%, not 50%, 20%. It's like running a supercomputer permanently throttled to 1/5 of its processing capacity, then publishing guidelines explaining that 1/5 is the safe and recommended operating speed, and funding research exclusively into the dangers of running faster. Who in their right mind accepts that the recommended setting is also the maximum safe setting, when every historical data point above that threshold shows not collapse but superior function? Either the entire institutional apparatus of global nutrition science has been catastrophically wrong for 50 years and lacks the integrity to correct itself, or it has been precisely right about its actual unstated objective. The answer is obvious, and it is cold. We've traced salt from a hospital saline drip to Roman etymology, to medieval mine tonnage, to amber oxygen readings, to geological anomalies, to a 1977 Senate committee, to a 1996 finding that disappeared. Every data point independent. Every data point pointing the same direction. This is not a mistake repeated across centuries. This is evidence of intent sustained across centuries. The system exists. It has always existed. And we are living inside it right now, at the dinner table, at the doctor's office, in every low-sodium product lining the supermarket shelf. The only question remaining is the one that has no comfortable answer. Go to your kitchen right now. Find it. The salt shaker sitting on your counter or table. The most ordinary object in your home. Unremarkable. Invisible through familiarity. Look at it differently now. You're looking at the substance that Roman soldiers accepted as wages, that French peasants dismembered tax collectors to access, that Gandhi chose specifically, strategically, as the symbol of an entire liberation movement, that emergency physicians reach for before anything else when a human body begins to fail. You're looking at what medieval states built their entire fiscal architecture around controlling, what the 20th century rebuilt that architecture to restrict, without walls, without tax collectors, without anyone noticing the transition. We started in a hospital room, a flatlined patient, a saline drip, a question so simple it had never occurred to us to ask it. If salt is the white death, why is it the first thing we pour into a dying person's veins? We now know the answer isn't comfortable. Salt isn't the white death. Salt is the white key, and someone changed the locks. We've been handed a map drawn by people who needed us not to read it, the etymology encoded in our own language, the tonnage recorded in our own archives, the oxygen levels preserved in our own geological record, the insulin data published in our own scientific journals. All of it was always there, in plain sight, filed under separate categories so we would never line it up. We're lining it up now. We're waking up. We're starting to see the shape of something that has been present for so long it became invisible, like the salt shaker on the table you stopped seeing years ago. The question that has no comfortable answer is not who is doing this. That question is too small. The real question is, how long have we been operating at 20%? And what would we become if that changed? We don't have that answer yet, but we're asking the question now, and that is how every genuine investigation begins. This investigation is not finished, not even close. Subscribe, because what comes next goes deeper than anything covered here. Share this with someone who still thinks the salt shaker is ordinary. And when you next sit down at a table, reach past that small white container and choose the low sodium option, because a guideline told you to. Remember what you now know about who writes the guidelines and why the salt shaker sits there. Ordinary, unremarkable.